When Nietzsche says we must go beyond good and evil, he is not calling for moral chaos. He is not saying that nothing is right and nothing is wrong. He is not advocating cruelty, lawlessness, or relativism. He is attacking something far more specific and far more entrenched. He is attacking the belief that moral categories such as good and evil are universal, timeless, and grounded in objective reality. Nietzsche's claim is not that morality does not exist. His claim is that morality has a history, and if it has a history, then it is not absolute. For centuries, philosophers assumed that moral values were either divinely grounded or rationally necessary. Good and evil were treated as features of the structure of reality itself. To question them was to question reason, God, or civilization. Nietzsche steps outside this assumption. He asks a dangerous question. What if our moral values are not truths, but interpretations? What if they express the psychology of those who created them? To go beyond good and evil means to step outside the inherited framework that treats moral dualism as sacred. It means suspending the reflex that divides the world into morally pure and morally corrupt, righteous and wicked, virtuous and evil. It does not mean abandoning evaluation. Nietzsche does not reject judgment. He rejects moral absolutism. He replaces the language of good and evil with a deeper question. Does this value enhance life or diminish it? Does it arise from strength or from weakness? Does it create or does it react? The traditional moral vocabulary conceals these questions. It moralizes them. It treats its own answers as self-evident. Nietzsche refuses that self-evidence. Beyond good and evil is therefore a methodological shift. It is an invitation to examine the origin, function, and psychological roots of moral claims rather than accepting them as sacred. This move destabilizes philosophy itself, because once morality is treated as historically contingent, philosophers can no longer pretend to speak from neutral ground. Their values must be examined as well. Nietzsche is not proposing moral indifference. He is proposing moral scrutiny. The difference is decisive. To remain within good and evil is to inherit categories without question. To move beyond them is to analyze how those categories came into being and whether they serve vitality or decline. This is not comfortable. It strips morality of its aura of inevitability. It reveals it as something created, shaped, and defended by particular types of human beings. Nietzsche's ambition in Beyond Good and Evil is to begin that exposure. He is not destroying morality, he is removing its mask. Nietzsche does not begin by attacking priests, he begins by attacking philosophers. This is deliberate. For centuries, philosophers presented themselves as seekers of pure truth, detached, rational, objective. They claimed to follow logic wherever it led. Their systems appeared austere, disciplined, impersonal. Nietzsche calls this a fiction. He argues that every philosophy is a confession. Behind every metaphysical system lies a psychology. Behind every argument lies a temperament. Philosophers do not discover truth in a vacuum. They interpret the world according to their instincts, fears, strengths, and needs. And then they disguise those instincts as rational necessity. This is what Nietzsche means when he says philosophers lie to themselves. The lie is rarely conscious. It is structural. A philosopher's moral preferences, aesthetic sensibilities, and psychological constitution shape what they are willing to call true. A philosopher who fears chaos will construct a system of order. A philosopher who longs for equality will discover universal moral law. A philosopher who distrusts instinct will elevate reason as supreme. None of this is neutral. Nietzsche does not accuse philosophers of stupidity. He accuses them of self-deception. They present their conclusions as objective, but those conclusions express what kind of person they are. Truth becomes sublimated instinct. This is devastating because it destabilizes the authority of philosophy itself. If systems are expressions of drives, then we must evaluate them not only logically, but psychologically. What kind of life does this philosophy serve? What kind of human type does it elevate? What kind does it suppress? Nietzsche suggests that many philosophical systems are covert moral projects. They smuggle in values under the guise of reason. They claim universality while expressing particularity. The philosopher becomes a legislator pretending to be a scientist. This is why Nietzsche distrusts the tone of moral certainty. The more confident a philosopher is that he has discovered timeless truth, the more Nietzsche suspects that a powerful drive is hiding behind the claim. Beyond good and evil begins here, with suspicion, not suspicion of morality alone, but suspicion of those who claim to ground it in pure reason. If philosophy is confession, then honesty requires acknowledging the drives that produce thought. Nietzsche demands that honesty. He does not deny truth. He denies the innocence of those who claim to possess it. One of the most abused ideas in Nietzsche is his claim that there are no facts, only interpretations. This line is often taken to mean that Nietzsche is a relativist, that truth is arbitrary, that anything goes, that all perspectives are equal. He means none of that. Nietzsche's point is more unsettling. He argues that what we call truth is always shaped by a perspective, by a particular vantage point within life. There is no view from nowhere. There is no disembodied reason floating above human drives. All knowing is situated. This does not mean that interpretations are equal. It means they are rooted. They arise from a certain configuration of strength, fear, ambition, or need. They are expressions of life. A strong interpretation expands possibilities. A weak interpretation narrows them. A life-affirming interpretation intensifies experience. A decadent one restricts it. Truth, in this sense, is not discarded. It is re-evaluated. Nietzsche attacks the assumption that truth must be detached, neutral, and free of instinct. He argues that the will to truth itself is a drive, one that may serve different purposes in different contexts. Some interpretations dominate because they are persuasive, others because they are comforting, others because they are enforced. None exist in isolation from power. But this is not relativism. Relativism says all perspectives are equally valid. Nietzsche says perspectives differ in rank. Some are more expansive, more integrated, more life-enhancing. Others arise from fear, resentment, or exhaustion. The task is not to eliminate perspective, but to recognize and evaluate it. When philosophers claim objectivity, Nietzsche asks, whose objectivity? For what purpose? In service of which type? Truth becomes a battlefield of interpretations rather than a static possession. This move is radical because it strips morality of its shield. If moral claims are interpretations, then they too must be examined for their origin and function. Who benefits from this moral truth? What instincts does it protect? What instincts does it suppress? Nietzsche's perspectivism is therefore not chaos. It is discipline. It demands that we analyze the roots of our convictions rather than hide behind them. To go beyond good and evil is to step into this field of interpretations without pretending that one's own position is innocent. There is no pure ground. There is only stronger and weaker ways of interpreting the world. Nietzsche forces philosophy to admit this. Nietzsche's attack now deepens. If truth is interpretation, and if philosophy is confession, then what appears as neutral metaphysics begins to look suspicious. Why, for example, do so many philosophers elevate reason over instinct? Why do they treat the soul as superior to the body? Why is unity valued over multiplicity? Nietzsche's answer is blunt. These are not neutral discoveries. They are moral preferences disguised as metaphysical truths. When a philosopher claims that reality is rational, ordered, and governed by universal law, Nietzsche asks, what kind of person needs reality to look like that? When a philosopher insists that the good is universal and binding, Nietzsche asks, What psychological demand is being satisfied? Metaphysics becomes moral autobiography. The division between body and soul, reason and passion, good and evil, these are not merely logical distinctions. They express valuations. They elevate certain traits and condemn others. For centuries, instinct was treated as inferior. Passion was seen as dangerous. The body was considered suspect. Nietzsche sees this as a moral prejudice embedded in philosophy itself. The philosopher pretends to describe the world. In reality, he often rearranges it to suit his own hierarchy of drives. This is why Nietzsche speaks of prejudices of philosophers. Prejudice here does not mean ignorance. It means prior commitment, a valuation that precedes argument. Philosophers rarely question their own moral assumptions. They argue from them. They construct systems that reinforce them. They call those systems rational. To go beyond good and evil means exposing these hidden commitments. It means asking, why is unity valued? Why is stability treated as superior to flux? Why is equality praised? Why is selflessness sanctified? These are not neutral conclusions. They are choices. Choices that reveal what kind of life is being defended. Nietzsche does not abolish metaphysics. He reinterprets it as an expression of life's underlying forces. Every system carries a temperament. Every doctrine protects a type. Once this is seen, philosophy can no longer pretend to innocence. The metaphysician is not a neutral observer. He is a legislator in disguise. Nietzsche's hammer begins tapping here, not smashing yet, but testing for hollowness. To understand what Nietzsche means by going beyond good and evil, we must distinguish between two moral vocabularies, good and evil versus good and bad. This distinction is foundational. Good and evil belongs to what Nietzsche calls slave morality. It divides the world morally. It identifies an enemy, a force that must be condemned absolutely. Evil is not simply inferior, it is morally corrupt, it deserves blame. Good and bad, by contrast, belongs to what Nietzsche calls master morality. It does not begin with condemnation, it begins with affirmation. The noble type calls itself good, meaning strong, powerful, life-affirming, and calls what is weak or insignificant bad without moral hatred. The difference is psychological. Master morality evaluates from a position of strength. It does not need an enemy to stabilize itself. It simply ranks. Slave morality evaluates reactively. It begins with resentment. It names the strong evil and elevates the weak as morally superior. It inverts values. When Nietzsche says we must go beyond good and evil, he does not mean we return to primitive domination. He means we must recognize that moral dualism is not eternal. It has an origin. Good and evil arose historically as a response to power. Slave morality could not defeat strength physically, so it defeated it morally. It redefined power as evil. It redefined weakness as virtue. It moralized hierarchy. This moralization became so dominant that it came to feel natural, universal, unquestionable. Nietzsche's move is not to abolish evaluation, it is to unmask its origin. Once we see that good and evil are not timeless truths but historical products, we can examine them rather than obey them. This does not mean endorsing cruelty. It means understanding that moral outrage is often rooted in resentment. Good and bad describes difference without hatred. Good and evil describes difference with moral hostility. Nietzsche believes that much of modern morality still operates under the good-evil structure, even when it claims to be rational or secular. To go beyond good and evil is to step outside this inherited battlefield and ask a deeper question. Who created these values, and why? That question prepares the ground for the pathology Nietzsche will later diagnose. Nietzsche now sharpens the blade. Morality, he argues, is not a universal law. It is a symptom. It expresses the psychological structure of the type of person who created it. This is where Nietzsche becomes unsentimental. Different human types require different value systems. A strong, expansive, confident type will generate values that affirm strength, risk, pride, and creativity. A threatened, inhibited, or resentful type will generate values that protect weakness, restrain power, and moralize vulnerability. Morality is therefore not neutral. It is adaptive. The mistake, the illusion Nietzsche dismantles, is the belief that one moral system fits all types equally. When one type universalizes its morality, it imposes its needs onto others. This is not an abstract claim. It is physiological. The healthy organism expands. The exhausted organism conserves. The confident type affirms itself directly. The insecure type moralizes against what threatens it. Nietzsche does not romanticize strength. He analyzes it. When he calls certain moral systems decadent, he means they arise from declining vitality. They do not enhance life. They restrict it. They reward conformity, suppress excellence, and treat intensity as suspect. And crucially, they present themselves as moral progress. This is where sanitization often occurs. Nietzsche is not politely saying, some people prefer different values. He is saying that certain moral frameworks are symptoms of exhaustion. They do not just restrain the strong, they slowly weaken the weak further. When a moral system trains individuals to distrust their instincts, feel guilt for their power, and define virtue as harmlessness, Nietzsche sees pathology, not kindness. He does not deny that suffering exists. He denies that institutionalizing weakness cures it. Morality becomes a diagnostic tool. What kind of human being needs this moral code? Does it cultivate vitality, or does it protect fragility? These are not rhetorical questions, they are structural. To move beyond good and evil is to evaluate morality itself according to the kind of life it produces. Some moral systems create creators, others create dependents. Nietzsche refuses to pretend that these outcomes are equal. If morality is an expression of type, then who can examine it without being swallowed by it? Nietzsche's answer is the free spirit. The free spirit is not simply someone who rejects tradition. He is not a rebel for its own sake. He is someone who can endure the collapse of moral certainty without rushing to replace it with another system of comfort. This requires strength. Most people inherit their values unconsciously. They feel them rather than choose them. When those values are questioned, they react defensively. The moral framework is part of their identity. The free spirit can suspend that identity. He can ask, what if my deepest convictions are not sacred? What if they arose from fear, resentment, habit, or weakness? What if they serve a type that is not mine? This is destabilizing. It feels like ground disappearing. The free spirit does not interpret that instability as danger. He interprets it as possibility. Nietzsche does not imagine the free spirit as morally indifferent. On the contrary, he is capable of deeper evaluation because he is not enslaved to inherited categories. He can examine values genealogically and psychologically. This examination requires courage. It requires the ability to stand without moral applause. The free spirit will often appear unsettling. He refuses to participate in automatic outrage. He refuses to sanctify what others treat as unquestionable. He tests even the values he holds. This testing is not nihilism, it is discipline. The free spirit knows that truth is perspectival, that morality has origins, and that values express type. He therefore refuses to hide his own perspective under universal claims. He does not pretend innocence. This honesty isolates him. Nietzsche accepts that isolation as the price of intellectual strength. The free spirit must be able to endure misunderstanding, hostility, and solitude. Most cannot. Beyond good and evil is not a comfortable place. It is a clearing where moral guarantees no longer protect the thinker. The free spirit stands there willingly. Nietzsche now moves into territory that makes modern readers uneasy: rank. He insists that hierarchy is not a social accident, it is a structural feature of life. Wherever there are differences in strength, capacity, creativity, discipline, or depth, there will be rank. The attempt to abolish rank does not eliminate difference. It moralizes against it. Nietzsche argues that moral systems often disguise hostility toward rank as commitment to equality. Equality becomes a sacred word. But what does it mean? Equal before what standard? Equal in capacity? Equal in drive? Equal in strength? Life does not produce equality of type. Some individuals create, others repeat. Some organize chaos, others seek order from outside. Some endure solitude, others require belonging. Nietzsche does not treat these differences as moral failings. He treats them as structural realities. The problem arises when a moral system demands that all be treated as if they were the same in value of type, not in legal standing but in existential weight. When excellence appears, it provokes discomfort. When ambition rises, it is labeled arrogance. When difference intensifies, it is interpreted as threat. This is not accidental, it is psychological. A moral system born from insecurity will resist hierarchy because hierarchy exposes difference. To remove hierarchy is to remove comparison. Nietzsche is not defending cruelty or oppression. He is defending the recognition of difference. Rank for him is not primarily political. It is existential. It concerns the ordering of drives within a person and the ordering of types within a culture. A culture that refuses rank flattens aspiration. It makes greatness suspicious. It teaches individuals to moderate themselves to avoid standing out. This produces stability, but it also produces stagnation. Nietzsche does not argue that everyone must dominate. He argues that cultures require higher types, creators, legislators of values, and that these types must not be suffocated by moral resentment. Inequality of type is inevitable. The question is whether it is acknowledged honestly or disguised as injustice. Beyond good and evil requires facing this without sentimentality. Life differentiates. Morality often tries to level. Nietzsche sides with differentiation. Nietzsche's defense of rank culminates in what he calls the pathos of distance. This phrase is not about cruelty, it is about self-conscious elevation. The noble type does not begin by condemning others, it begins by affirming itself. It feels the distance between itself and what it is not. This distance is not hatred, it is differentiation. The pathos of distance allows the noble type to create values without asking permission. It does not seek validation from the herd. It does not measure itself by universal approval. This is why Nietzsche associates nobility with self-confidence rather than aggression. The noble person does not obsess over enemies. They do not need constant comparison. They do not define themselves through opposition. Their values arise from overflow, not resentment. This is fundamentally different from slave morality. Slave morality begins with hostility. It defines the strong as evil. It constructs identity around moral condemnation. The noble type, by contrast, defines itself first and lets evaluation follow from affirmation. Distance is necessary for creation. Without distance, there is only conformity. If one constantly measures oneself against collective standards, one cannot legislate new ones. The pathos of distance, therefore, protects higher types from being absorbed into mass morality. It also explains why nobility appears cold. From the outside, distance can look like indifference, but Nietzsche sees it as structural. A creator cannot be fully immersed in the moral expectations of the group. Some separation is required. This is not an argument for domination. It is an argument for autonomy. The noble type does not seek to suppress others. It simply refuses to collapse into sameness. The pathos of distance is the psychological condition of value creation. Without it, hierarchy dissolves into resentment. With it, new forms can emerge. Nietzsche does not apologize for distance. He treats it as necessary. Nietzsche later describes his method as philosophizing with a hammer. This line is often misunderstood. The hammer is not primarily a tool of destruction. It is a tuning fork. One taps an idol lightly to hear whether it rings hollow. Nietzsche does not begin by smashing morality, equality, truth, or compassion. He taps them, he listens, he asks, are these values solid or are they sustained by fear and resentment? The hammer tests. What he finds again and again is that many sacred concepts are fragile. They rely on moral habit, emotional attachment, and inherited reverence rather than on strength. When equality is treated as sacred, Nietzsche asks, does this value cultivate excellence or does it restrain it? When compassion is elevated as supreme, he asks, does it strengthen or does it preserve weakness? When truth is worshipped as neutral, he asks, whose instinct does this serve? The hammer exposes. It exposes how philosophers hide their psychology. It exposes how moral systems claim universality while expressing particular types. It exposes how certain values become untouchable because questioning them threatens collective comfort. Nietzsche's tone is sharp because he refuses reverence. He does not grant immunity to moral concepts simply because they are widely accepted. He insists that even the most cherished ideals must survive examination. This is why he appears dangerous. He tests everything. He tests the will to truth itself. He tests morality's claim to universality. He tests the modern belief in moral progress. Some idols crack under the sound. Philosophy with a hammer is therefore not reckless destruction. It is disciplined irreverence. It refuses to bow before inherited sanctity. To go beyond good and evil requires this method. Without the hammer, morality remains protected by habit. With it, we begin to hear where the hollowness lies. Nietzsche now presses on one of the most sacred modern values, equality. He does not deny legal equality. He does not argue for arbitrary oppression. His target is not civil structure. It is moral absolutism. Equality, in modern moral language, often functions as unquestionable good. To question it is treated as moral failure. Nietzsche asks, why? He observes that equality becomes moralized most intensely in cultures that fear hierarchy. When difference in strength, talent, ambition, or intensity becomes uncomfortable, equality is elevated as a protective shield. The language shifts from description to condemnation. Excellence becomes arrogance. Distinction becomes injustice. Hierarchy becomes immorality. Nietzsche sees this not as progress, but as psychology. When a culture universalizes equality as a moral absolute, it often reflects a discomfort with rank. It may arise from compassion, but it can also arise from resentment. If strength exposes weakness, then leveling removes the exposure. Equality as moral absolute does not eliminate difference, it disciplines it. It pressures individuals to moderate themselves, to avoid standing too far above the group, to internalize restraint. This produces social cohesion. It also produces uniformity. Nietzsche does not argue that inequality should be enforced violently. He argues that difference in type is inevitable, and that moral condemnation of excellence signals insecurity. He distinguishes between equality before law and equality of type. The first is political, the second is existential. Life produces differentiation. Some individuals possess greater creative force, discipline, endurance, or insight. To pretend otherwise is denial. When equality becomes sacred, critique becomes taboo. The hammer cannot tap it without outrage. Nietzsche insists that sacredness itself must be tested. Does the moral absolutism of equality cultivate strength, or does it stabilize mediocrity? He refuses to answer sentimentally. Beyond good and evil requires asking whether universal moral claims mask particular psychological needs. Equality, when elevated beyond critique, becomes one of those claims. Nietzsche taps it and listens. Beyond good and evil does not deliver Nietzsche's final diagnosis. It clears the ground. By the end of this work, several things have been exposed. Philosophy is not neutral, it is expressive. Truth is perspectival, not innocent. Morality is historical, not eternal. Values reveal type. Rank and differentiation are structural realities. Sacred concepts must be tested, not protected, but something is still missing. We now know that moral systems are expressions of psychological types. We know that good and evil are not timeless categories. We know that resentment may lie beneath moral absolutism. What we do not yet have is a full autopsy. Beyond good and evil is the preparation. On the genealogy of morals will be the dissection. In BGE, Nietzsche taps the idols and hears hollowness. In genealogy, he will open them up. He will trace the origin of slave morality. He will show how ressentiment becomes value. He will describe how guilt is internalized. He will call certain moral systems sick, not metaphorically, but physiologically. Nothing in genealogy makes sense unless BGE has already destabilized moral innocence. Once morality is no longer sacred, it can be examined as symptom. Once philosophy is unmasked as confession, it can be evaluated by type. Once equality, compassion, and truth are no longer immune to critique, their origins can be traced. Beyond good and evil, therefore, performs a necessary violence. It removes reverence. Without reverence, investigation becomes possible. Nietzsche does not end here with relativism or chaos. He ends with a demand: test everything, especially what feels unquestionable. The hammer has sounded, now the scalpel will follow.